What's up, RotoViz?
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. Sorry we missed you yesterday. It was Valentine's Day. Dave and I both had other things to do, wives to keep happy. Dave, I don't know about you, but Lindsay ended up taking full advantage of the situation. So today, when we're recording, it's the day after Valentine's Day. We wake up early. We're just going to do a pop-in to IKEA. A pop-in.
Yep.
My freaking car was dragging the highway on the way back. She had some sort of nesting event, and now I'm going to just be using Allen wrenches for like the next 2 weeks, I think. How did your Valentine's Day go?
Oh, it was good, thanks. Didn't have to make any furniture purchases, which is good, but I can definitely relate to that whole Allen wrench thing. And actually, we recently moved, and my wife got a ton of stuff on Marketplace on Facebook. And the thing is, the IKEA stuff, if you don't have their particular bolts and everything that you need to put stuff back together, it's like impossible to do. So I spent like months ordering all of the specific pieces I needed. It was not fun.
Yeah, it's a special brand of hell. It really is. Yep. So yeah, we're pumped to get into this show this week. This is the first time we're chatting since the Super Bowl. I know we're going to want to get into some thoughts on that. We have a very special guest tonight who's going to get us really pumped and ready to go for the 2022 season in a way that we haven't done yet. So Dave, want to give us a quick drop and let's hit a little Super Bowl chatter. So Cincinnati Bengals fans are still probably licking their wounds. So close yet again. But the Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Donald, and the gang, of course, Cooper Kupp, favorite of the podcast here, and just absolute monster that drove Dave and I to so much success this year. They come away victorious. Really special to see, players who haven't been there before get a ring. No matter what you feel about Odell Beckham Jr., he's obviously been a great player for his career. It was kind of neat to see him score a touchdown after the tumultuous year that he's had. And of course, he tore the ACL. So just even on the Los Angeles side, so much to talk about there. I think the Bengals, their weaknesses were even further exposed after the first sack of Burrow. The wheels really came off. I think Taylor was in over his head a little bit in that final 2-minute or 1 minute drill, what have you. We had some personnel issues. We had some play calling issues. So just a lot going on there. But it was great to see Stafford get the ring. Great to see Donald get the ring. And, if you're Cincinnati, you're just hoping that it doesn't turn out like it's turned out for so many other AFC teams who have been close, not gotten it done, and then they'll go back all the way to Dan Marino, Jim Kelly, and now Josh Allen. I mean, what's going to happen? Getting through that AFC Championship game, getting to the Super Bowl, and then coming away empty-handed, it's just got to sting. So, what do you have for us on the Super Bowl, Dave?
Yeah, I had a lot of the same thoughts as you. I think that one of the most interesting lines to come out of it from a fantasy perspective is going to be what people do with Odell Beckham. Starts off the game looking good, makes some plays. It's easy to get this narrative that he's back, that he should be sought after, should be a big part of offenses going forward. Then you have this injury, just another factor that we have to equate into this conversation. So I don't know, it was interesting to see Joe Mixon not on the field at certain points. I'm sure infuriating to some Bengals fans, but overall, I thought it was a really fun game. Managed to keep me engaged. Super Bowls have been pretty good. I like looking back when I was a kid, I always thought that there was a lot more that got out of hand, but they've been really good for a while now.
Yeah, basically, other than the Tampa Kansas City game, they've all been great, the last decade or so. Totally agree with you there. The last note here on Beckham, I'm 30 underdog best ball tournament drafts in already, Dave. And Beckham was such a big exposure. I was stacking he and Van Jefferson with Stafford. They're all on discount with Kupp being, top 3-4 pick, even in half PPR. And I think I was 50% exposed through 30. But if we're gonna max it out, I still got time to correct that, and maybe by the end of the season he gives us a couple startable games. But yeah, it's just really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, let's hit another quick drop, and then we'll introduce the guest of the night. Oh man, I like that. I like that one. I don't think I've heard. Did you hit the wrong button?
Well, no, I just didn't. I didn't want to go back to the generic quick drop, so I went with the "Is it time to panic" one that we haven't used in a long time.
Okay, all right. It's not time to panic. It's actually the totally opposite of that. We've got Scott Barrett, DFB on Twitter, one of the biggest names in fantasy for the past several years. My buddy, we've been playing Dynasty for the better part of a decade together now, I think. And just have had a lot of fun getting to know Scott, both within the context of the game and outside the context of the game. So, Scott, how are you doing tonight, man? We are so pumped to have you here. I'm
doing good. Thanks for having me. I liked your Valentine's Day story. In college, I went on a first date to IKEA. It was my first time ever going to IKEA.
Yeah.
It was I just got some girl's number. She was a sculpture major. And I'm like, where do you want to go on the first date? She's like, I love IKEA. And it was weird. I'm like, all right, well, I'll get a good story out of it. Get to tell it now on this podcast. Yeah. We made out in one of the fake showers.
Oh wow!
Bizarre, didn't buy anything. Yeah.
That's better than my trip was for sure today. But that college was many moons for me. So Scott, this is year 2 for you at Fantasy Points. It's just been so cool to see how quickly that brand has grown. You guys are all over Sirius. You have some really cool coworkers over there. Wes Huber, somebody that I think both of us had worked with previously, maybe at Pro Football Focus. You got Cosell over there. It's just nuts. You guys have really been blowing up.
Yeah. Thanks for the shout out. We're running our early bird special. If anyone wants to check that out, I think it expires in a couple of days. So act fast on that.
Alrighty. Well, Scott's here to talk to us about 2022 coaching changes, how it's going to affect the NFL landscape, maybe how it's going to affect the fantasy landscape. He told me that this was going to be a monologue. So Dave and I are going to go into our pensive mode, and we're going to give Scott the floor here to wax rhapsodic about all things NFL coaching.
Yeah. So when you told me you wanted to have me on the podcast, you said, yeah, we'll just give you like 7 to 10 minutes to talk about whatever you wanted. And I was like, all right. So I wrote up a monologue, and it's on the recent string of coaching and GM hirings and firings. Like the analysis I've been seeing on Twitter is like Brian Dable, Mike McDaniel, buy Jalen Waddle, Josh McDaniels, Doug Peterson tight ends historically smash. I don't have that. I have like more of a deep meta dive into just this very unique hiring cycle. I've been thinking a lot about it. There's been 13 new GM hires over the past 2 seasons. There's 9 new head coaching hires this year. That's the most in NFL history. Among those teams, this is the Giants' 4th new head coach in 8 years. Before that, they only had 2 head coaches in almost 20 seasons. The Broncos, their 7th new head coach in 15 seasons. The Raiders, their 10th new head coach in 18 seasons. Basically, a new head coach every other year. I think this is not good. This is a mistake. This is a sign of organizational dysfunction. And these teams are putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage. So in college, I took a political science course that was basically on the irrefutable greatness of democracy as a political invention. There's no homework. There's no tests. Your entire grade centered around a final paper. And as you know, Curtis, as a natural born contrarian, I decided to write my paper arguing the opposite. So I looked for a book and I found one called Democracy, the God That Failed. In that book, the author argued we should return to monarchical rule, which is in every way superior to democracy. He made a number of arguments I don't really remember, but one I thought was really compelling, which centered around the notion of time preference. So basically in modern democracies, elected officials will never think farther ahead than their next election cycle. So for American presidents, that's 4, maybe 8 years. And so as a result, the author argued things like ballooning national debt, runaway inflation, that's not a big concern. That's someone else's problem. I'm trying to get elected. We'll let the next politician deal with that. So in democracies, leaders are myopic, focused on the short term, looting the coffers today at the expense of tomorrow. Whereas like a king is focused on maximizing the wealth of his kingdom across the totality of his lifespan or the lifespan of his heirs and beyond. Anyway, it's a weird book. And like, obviously I don't think we should, replace a president with a king, but that argument stuck with me and time preference and how that relates to this recent hiring cycle. So firing a coach after 1 or 2 bad seasons definitely sends a message, but I don't think it's the one that owners would like to think it sends, which is that we don't tolerate losing. We're a winning team. I think the message it really sends is that they're impatient. All prospective hires know that their time frame is short and limited. They need immediate results. GMs then know they don't have 5 years to turn their team into a juggernaut capable of winning the Super Bowl, but 2 years to make the postseason, which is a far less worthy goal, I think. And I think most fans think. And so the best example of a team with a bad sense of time preference would be the Giants. They've had a bottom 5 roster for 6 consecutive seasons. And throughout that entire period, they never lowered their time preference. It was a bottom 5 roster trying to win now. At the very least, it was like a half tank, and there's no such thing as a half tank. They drafted a running back top 5 instead of trading down. They passed on Justin Herbert, who they had as a generational prospect ahead of Kyler Murray, even when he was a rookie. And he spent big on free agency. So they're now still bottom 5 roster is $11 million over the cap. And I think it makes sense within what I was talking about before. Dave Gettleman wasn't thinking about what was best for the team when he did that, which would have been sucking for a few years to better position themselves in the future. He was thinking about himself, as all people do. He knew that if he didn't show immediate results, he was going to be fired. So he prioritized small, short-term gains over more significant long-term gains and to the detriment of the team. That's my primary point, but there are smaller ones as well when it comes to, impatient owners and coaching, churning over coaches every other year. Teams with frequent turnover will have a harder time attracting top candidates. Why would you want to go to Denver knowing you have a short leash from an impatient front office when Pittsburgh's had 3 head coaches in 50 plus years? And that's true of free agents. Regime uncertainty makes your team a less attractive location. Well, I'd love to play for this coach, but who knows how long he's going to stick around. So I'll go to this other team. And then draft picks as well, like Laviska Shenault. He looks like a colossal bust, but maybe Jay Gruden and Doug Marrone had a unique plan in place to develop him, use his skill set more effectively. You also might be setting your team back another year from a roster construction standpoint. Denver was courting Dan Quinn to replace Vic Fangio, but what would that have done to the roster? They run very different schemes. So, it could be the case where you spent big on free agency, all these defensive players necessary to make the Fangio scheme run most effectively, but who might be less valuable to the Quinn scheme. And then you have to go out and get those players who do fit that scheme. But beyond its impact on draft capital and acquiring players in free agency, it has a massive negative impact on the players there. Look at the success of Josh Allen. The ownership was patient with the coaching staff, and the coaching staff was patient with Josh Allen. They gave him stability and time to develop in one scheme. He very glaringly did not become a top 2 quarterback overnight. And then let's look back at the Giants. Daniel Jones in contrast to Josh Allen. The Giants front office is still asking themselves, is Daniel Jones good? Because they don't know, because it's impossible to succeed operating in a different scheme every year with a bottom 5 supporting cast. You can't ever get a clear evaluation that way. So it's just a vicious cycle of bad QB play and coaching fires, and you're doing a grave disservice to your players. And so to wrap it up, I don't think it's a coincidence that the league's best franchises have the smallest amount of turnover at the coaching and GM positions. There's some causation correlation issues there, but also the best GMs tend to be the most far-sighted ones. Bill Belichick, the GM, always thinking multiple years down the road, minus the infamous Mohamed Sanu trade. He's always looking to better the team in the future. Even when everyone else is arguing he should be win now, he's always looking to trade a player a year or two early rather than a year or two late. And so from what I can tell, the best GMs, the best NFL teams, the best dynasty players always have the lowest time preference. And especially with investors, Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of all time, his quote, "Our favorite holding period is forever." For one thing, there's less competition. His peers are rarely looking beyond a stock's next quarterly earnings, but he's looking 20 plus years down the road. And so that's true with dynasty. You know how I operate, you know how TJ Calkins operates, or Adam Harstead. I have some more points. I think more owners should be like actively tanking, not paying a head coach for losses, but maybe force them to start Tim Tebow at quarterback for a year. But this monologue was long enough. So eager to hear your thoughts.
Dave, why don't you jump in? I saw you just champing at the bit several times.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think that a lot of those numbers you shared are pretty staggering when you think about the turnover that we've seen. The other thing that always confuses me too is why teams are so quickly to move on from one thing or one coach to another coach that perhaps has proven in the past that they are not necessarily a winner, or to somebody else that hasn't really built up that much of a resume. So I can understand taking chances on, young coaches that have shown something, but it seems very often like just changing scenery is what they're looking for. And it doesn't even matter if it's somebody that has a proven track record, which is kind of interesting to one thing that I had a professor talk about one time, which is lots of times big companies, they look for CEOs or CFOs to fill positions that have been at other companies. Yeah. And they're very, very resistant to looking for people coming up the ranks. And that's regardless of if these people performed well at other companies. I actually had worked with a CEO who basically brought 2 companies to bankruptcy and then still got hired at another job, right, as a CEO to run another company. And it's like, well, at some point, you run out of the leash here, you should. So there's definitely some interesting corollaries. And I like a lot of those points that you brought up.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, if you're a CEO who's looking for a job and you have prior experience, we can infer what we can infer what your performance has been like. Scott, I think a follow-up question that I would have is, how can teams make the shift? Because, I guess I understand that most of the owners, I don't know what percentage it would be, but I have a sneaking suspicion a higher percentage of owners than we would care to admit view their team as a business. They view it as an investment. Their ultimate goal is not necessarily a Super Bowl. It's profitability and its return on initial investment, which was huge. Obviously, I mean, it's one of the biggest businesses that you can buy, whether you're part of a partnership or not. And so, how do you make that shift? I mean, how do you know if your coach is good? How do you know 3 or 4 years in when you haven't made the playoffs yet? And your GM is still figuring out the roster. Like, what do you do if you're the Denver Broncos? How do you become the Pittsburgh Steelers and have confidence that you're on the right track?
Yeah. So on one hand, I do get some of these teams just constantly looking for the next head coach, let's see what this guy can do. Try and find the right guy. And then ideally you have him in place for 20 years, but it's also, like I said, there's a lot of trade-offs, dysfunction in the locker room. The players are unhappy, but it's also just really hard to gauge how effective a coach is or not. But you might need multiple years to really see what happens. I don't think 2 years is enough time to really qualify that. But I will say again, I do understand it. And part of my understanding with that is what are the 2 most important positions in football? And I think this postseason was a great representation of that. Yeah. It's the quarterback position, which is borderline seeker and Quidditch levels of broken, the most important by a landslide. Like, give me the top DN, the top cornerback, the top tight end. Is that worth a top 5 quarterback? I don't know. It maybe not. And then the other one is a top head coach. Like this postseason, it was all the elite quarterbacks, and then Kyle Shanahan, a genius offensive mastermind who also called the plays. And so there's asymmetric returns there. And especially if you get a top 5 quarterback like a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, I think Joe Burrow's already in that mix, or you get a Kyle Shanahan, maybe Sean McVay, Bill Belichick. But then after that, I think it's like basically like everyone's almost the same. Like, what's the difference between Kirk Cousins and Jimmy Garoppolo? I don't think there's much. So you really want that top 5 elite offensive genius head coach, top 5 elite quarterback, but that's hard to find. So maybe some of these teams are just, continually taking those chances. The Raiders, is it John Gruden? We'll lock him up to a 10-year deal. Is it Josh McDaniels? So I get the reasoning and I get you're chasing that, but there's trade-offs with everything. So, and especially some of these head coaches, I don't think any of these guys are Kyle Shanahan. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for the topic. I think especially, the tie-in to Dynasty was quite interesting because, we've spent a lot more time talking about the idea of, if you're not in the mix for first, you want to be in the mix for worst. And there, there's plenty of reasons behind that. And you really ought to even take that mentality to the startup as well. Don't even play the startup down the middle. And you and I have done a lot of startup drafts together. And, I think that's one, quick little fantasy takeaway that anybody listening to that's like, man, how are you guys going 50,000 foot level on the 2022 hiring cycle already? If you're just looking for the fantasy takeaway. If you weren't a serious contender in 2021 and you're weak in rookie draft capital, you got to look at your roster. You got to look at your assets and you've got to ask yourself the tough question. You might have to make the difficult trade to get rid of the high-priced mid-career veteran, not the guy that's over the hill. You might have to trade AJ Brown already, stuff that's uncomfortable in order to put yourself back in position to win for the long run, because otherwise you're just like all of the NFL teams beyond, maybe that top 5 or 6 who are just hoping to get hot one time and have it work. But you could wake up very quickly and be the Tennessee Titans and have missed your window after, outperforming using, an outdated offensive scheme.
This was also a really interesting Super Bowl from the sense that this was also kind of like a dynasty Super Bowl where, like in your league, Black Brown, where I sold out everything to win now. Like this year, if I don't get it done, it's game over. Yep. And I went to the championship. I didn't win. And then the other team was a lot younger, and it's like up and coming, had Jamar Chase, that's like the Bengals, and it worked out for them. But the Bengals definitely easily could have won that game. If Burrow evades that sack, he hits Jamar Chase wide open, that's game. And so, it's just interesting. Like the Rams really are just like a super win now dynasty team, like mortgaging their future. And it was interesting and to see that work for them.
All right. Well, let's do a hard veer into a totally different topic now. We are going to do, as we're going to do for each of the next 5 weeks, with our superstar lineup of guests. Scott is just the first of 5. He would have you believe that he's the biggest and best, and arguably he is. But we're going to do a two-round draft. Scott has chosen the 1 QB PPR format. So that's what we're going to do. Dave and I will be, maybe adding some comments here and there from the 2022 RotoViz Fantasy Football Rookie Draft Guide. Scott may have some chatter that he wants to share about some of the prospects, or we might go through this in record time and just be done. And then you guys can ask us questions and we'll interact afterwards. So, Dave, let's give us a drop. All right.
That's the lightning round drop for anybody that's interested.
Which drop was that?
That is the lightning round drop.
The lightning round. Oh,
I haven't used many of these in a while, so I'm just bringing them back for fun because we're gonna. I didn't even tell you
to check the bank tonight, and you're all over it, man.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I appreciate the professionalism. So Scott, as most of our guests probably will end up, quote unquote, randomly doing, has drawn the 101. Scott, the board is all yours. It's 1 QB PPR. Whose name are you calling at the podium?
I don't think I've ever randomly drawn the 101. So of course it's a mock. So I just want to say, like, I'm here kind of to learn from you guys. I know you had the guide come out. I really respect RotoViz and your opinions. I'm still very early in the process, rough draft with my models. I'm going to go with Treylon Burks. He was the number 2 wide receiver prospect in my model last year. And I just don't know how he's not my wide receiver 1 this year. He's 6'3", 225 pounds. He had 4 times as many receiving yards, 6 times as many touchdowns as the next closest receiver on his team. I don't know how he didn't win the Biletnikoff. I don't know how he's not the unanimous wide receiver 1. So it could change. Again, I have to tinker with my models, but Treylon Burks.
Yeah, I think if you just look at him, this is one of those things where I got so cute. I mean, he's got a better profile than DK Metcalf with similar physical attributes, and I just whiffed on that, man. I had 0 DK exposure a couple years ago, and sometimes the eye test does matter. Like when you look at Treylon Burks, it is just very difficult to imagine him being a flop. Now, maybe he doesn't achieve ceiling. Maybe he's scheme dependent. I've heard a lot of the film analysts say that he's not complete. He's not crisp. Okay, whatever. Like he's so good in spite of that what happens if he does start running better routes? I mean, he'll be insane. So Treylon, for what it's worth, Scott, is a near consensus 101 of the 5 guys doing our RotoViz fantasy football rookie draft guide this year. So this is very chalky. We totally agree. And very excited to see what his athletic measurables turn out to be next month. So let's give Scott Treylon. Dave, it looks like I'm on the clock for 102.
Yes, that's right.
Are you able to update the sheet there?
I am.
Okay.
No, I'll update it.
All right. Okay, so I'm 102 here. I do like some of the other receivers. Garrett Wilson. Obviously, I'm Columbus, Ohioan, and got to see a lot of him over the past couple seasons. Drake London is a player who really pops in a lot of the traditional RotoViz sensibilities. Young player, very early breakout. He's got good size. Power 5. Checks a lot of the boxes. But I'm going to go Breece Hall. He's still only 20 years old. Won't turn 21 until after he's drafted. This is a very weak running back class. And though I think Garrett Wilson and Drake London are probably respectively better prospects at their position than Breece Hall, at some point in a rookie draft, and this year it's very early, value over replacement in the draft does matter. And we always see, always is strong. We often see running backs provide earlier returns in their rookie season, and they get those nice little value spikes, up into the second and third round of startup type value. And, that's just hard to pass on that at the 102. So, Scott, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at Breece much. He's very young, obviously, which we like. He was amongst the most elusive and most effective at breaking tackles, and PFF's metrics for elusiveness, et cetera. He's consistently in the, top 3 to 5 range there. Power 5 program at Iowa State really was the entire offense. So, a little background there. Dave, anything you want to add on Breece? I know you did a lot of our running back work for the guide.
Yeah, I guess the other thing would be just what we talked about last week, that he finished second among the class in breakaway rush score, which is one of the most predictive things that we've looked at RotoViz. So just another reason to like him, getting into a range with a lot of these backs that we've seen have a lot of success. So I like Breece as well.
I know who you're going with. Dave's on the clock with 103. I know who this pick is.
Yes, this will be Garrett Wilson from the Ohio State University, player that I took a tremendous amount of time in all of the mocks that we did as a staff. For me, it really comes down to what he was able to achieve on such an incredibly talented roster in his time at Ohio State, looks to have the type of game that's going to be able to translate in a variety of situations at the next level. Really compelling profile when you look at it. Scores strongly in Travis May's API. There's just a lot to like with Wilson. I will say I am intrigued by Jake London, but at this point I have to give the edge to Wilson.
Can't argue with the pick. Can't argue with that pick at all. I think the one thing to note here, with the Ohio State Buckeyes and the recruiting just buzzsaw that they've become, especially at this position. For those of you that remember Brian Hartline, formerly of the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I think several times, at least one time Pro Bowler in the NFL, had at least one 1,000-yard receiving season. He is the wide receivers coach in Columbus, amongst the best recruiters in college football. Everyone wants to play in Ryan Day's system. He gets the best quarterbacks. So you really have a situation in Columbus where some of our breakout metrics are going to struggle at times. You have to adjust situationally for the teammate context. It's what we've been doing for Alabama and at times Georgia or LSU over the last couple of years. Certainly Columbus is in the same situation now. So Scott, we're back to you for the 104, my friend.
So I'm still a little far behind on my wide receiver model, so I kind of don't want to guess at who the wide receiver 3 would be in this class. So I'll take Kenneth Walker, and I'll just say, I've heard a lot of people trashing this running back class and saying it's weak at the top end. Their models don't like Breece Hall. My model says he's the clear RB1 and a fairly high level running back prospect. It really likes him. And then it really likes, or maybe slightly less, Kenneth Walker as the RB2. So feel pretty confident he's the RB2 in this class. So I'll lock him up.
Yeah, I like it, man. I mean, he really popped this past year. The transfer was very good for him, obviously from Wake Forest to Michigan State. And, compared to the other positions in the draft class, this is one of those years where, we're probably not going to see a running back in the first round of the actual NFL draft. But there's anywhere from 3 to 5 guys, I think, that could go on day 2. And Walker is definitely one of them that I would be shocked if he made it out of even the second round. So definitely can't criticize that pick. Walker is highly thought of amongst the rest of our team. He was a consensus first round, rookie in every rookie mock that we did. A little bit later on, but once you get past, I think the top 2 picks of this draft, the tier is pretty deep. It's anywhere from maybe 5 to 8 players wide after that. So I'm back on the clock at 105. I'm going to go with the guy Drake London here and pass it over to you, Dave. We've already talked a little bit about Drake.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a bit of a hard one for me here, in that I almost want to break somewhat of the RotoViz mold and go for Isaiah Spiller, just because I find him such a young, exciting running back coming out of Texas A&M. But I actually am going to go here with Jamison Williams, who at one point, I don't know if people realize this, actually was a teammate of the 2 Ohio State players that are going to go pretty high at the wide receiver position this year, in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. So
he carried their shoulder pads actually for a couple of years.
That's true.
He had to get to Alabama to play.
Yes, which is a crazy thing to think about. But he went to Alabama in his 3rd year playing collegiate football, 15 games, 1,572 yards, averaged nearly 20 yards per reception, put up 15 receiving touchdowns, and had a receiving dominator of 0.31. That's pretty impressive stuff when you consider the context that he was in. So I'm going to go with Williams here, actually jumping over a player in David Bell that some people might have a little bit ahead of Williams.
Yeah, I think we're into that next. After London, I think we're into another little mini tier at the wide receiver position that's half a dozen players deep, maybe. It's really exciting. And I have a feeling maybe it won't be with this pick, either with the 7 or 10 spot. I think I know who Scott might be taking, because we were chatting rookie wide receivers and DMs a few days ago. So I'm curious, very titillated here to see who he takes at the 107.
I'd assume that guy was going to go a little bit later. So
okay,
I'll take Chris Olave again. I'm still not very far ahead in my wide receiver research, but he was my wide receiver one heading into the season. And he, by at least one of my models, he's the wide receiver 2 in this class, and the wide receiver 1 got drafted.
Well, he was one of the players holding Jameson Williams down. And I think it's just difficult, when you're looking at a change in quarterback mid-career, and then all of the 4 and 5 star talent that's coming in, constantly. It's hard to really, criticize a player for not, breaking out to kind of that next level. We see this happen all the time. There are players who pop as a freshman and then never really take that next step. It doesn't delegitimize what happened, when they're 18, 19 years old. The classic example that I think of is Juju Smith-Schuster. Who popped as an 18-year-old and then was kind of pseudo disappointing for a couple years after that. And it's just one of the players that kind of proves out, the youth, the importance of youth in the model. I'm going to go back here to the final running back in our top. I guess it'd be our tier 2 of running backs. And Dave, you mentioned this player at 6, Isaiah Spiller, requisite size. I think he's a day 2 lock. He's been flying up in some of the recent, actual NFL mock drafts recently. I think he could challenge for, maybe even being a top 50 pick out of Texas A&M. So like the player, don't love him. But after this, I think there's a very precipitous drop off. We're going to see a run on wide receivers and tight ends and maybe even quarterbacks before we see, other running backs in most rookie drafts. So Dave, it's back over to you.
Yeah, so that's going to bring me now to David Bell, who I mentioned earlier, wide receiver out of Purdue. In comparison to Williams, who I went with earlier, we'll see exactly where they come in, but he's 6'2", 210, so a bigger player. As I mentioned, out of Purdue, really one of the highlights on his resume would be a receiving dominator of 0.44 in a 2020 season at Purdue. Only 6 games in that year. Overall, though, a pretty strong body of work, 21 receiving touchdowns on his career with nearly 3,000 yards. So he would be the player that I would pivot to here. Of course, as you said, at this point, I start to get a little less excited about the picks that we're going to be making.
Well, David Bell, we haven't talked much about him on the podcast yet because he's not, one of those top tier guys that we've been reviewing for the last week or two. But he actually had over 1,000 receiving yards in his true freshman season. Rondale Moore was still at Purdue at this time. And he became a Devy darling for those of you that play Devy. If you don't know what Devy is, it's just a version of Dynasty where you actually have access to college prospects on like a taxi squad. So they're kind of on your reserve and you spend draft capital on them just like you would a rookie instead. And David Bell quickly, leapt into everyone's, top 12, even after his true freshman year. And, he actually he's tied for the second best adjusted production index in this class. It's Travis May and Blair Andrews' new way of measuring wide receiver production. He's 78th percentile amongst all wide receivers since the year 2000. Again, we're looking for players that are in the 60th percentile or above to have a higher chance at a top 24 PPR season. And likelihood of signing a second contract in the NFL. So David Bell actually equal to Drake London in that 78th percentile too. So this is good value here. And I think, this is a situation where, the top of the class is not being as highly regarded even as the 2021 class or, certainly the 2023 class. And, the 101 is not an equal asset year to year to year. But I still really love the idea of collecting first round picks this year, especially, if it's at a discount. And it's because of players like Olave, like Bell, that you're going to get in the second half of those first rounds. So I think that's a great pick, Dave. Scott, we're back to you at the 110.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to me. He's not viewed as a very high level prospect. Like you said, 1,000+ yards as a freshman with Rondale on the team, and then 100+ yards per game the next season, 100+ yards per game his final year at Purdue as a junior. So I think I'm supposed to take Jahan Dotson, but I'll take the guy you alluded to earlier so I can, I guess, make the case for him, and that's Justin Ross. Something I don't really understand is that heading into this season, he was the unanimous wide receiver one. He was Dane Brugler's wide receiver one, Lance Zierlein's wide receiver one. Basically everyone's wide receiver one. It's a little understandable given his early career production and efficiency metrics. And I mean, this year wasn't great, but I mean, the Clemson offense as a whole was a dumpster fire. And more importantly, he played the entire season with stress fractures in his foot. He just had surgery on it. That injury occurred in the preseason. And then the fact that Trevor Lawrence did not look like the generational quarterback he was supposed to be, it's another argument, I think, in favor of Justin Ross being better than at least he's being hyped currently. So, I don't know. Justin Ross, I feel good about it, but I haven't done a lot of research. So.
Yeah. I mean, 9 touchdowns, 1,000 yards as a freshman. That is impressive.
It was also like 4.2 yards per route run. I think it's top 3 in PFF College's database since 2014 when they started tracking. And he was 17 and a half years old. So just an insane freshman season.
Yeah. And when we were talking about this last week, Scott, you reminded me that, I mean, I was making, after his freshman year, I was making, comparisons to early collegiate Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, that's the type of season that he had. That's the type of physique that he had. This is just a very context-laden prospect profile. It's going to be really interesting to see where he starts getting mocked, how much of the combine he participates in, I think, will be important for him, because he's going to have to answer some questions about, how his career's gone since then. I think there's also going to be a lot of weight placed on the medicals here, because Ross actually retired and unretired from football in college due to a severe spinal condition. And so you marry that, with the other orthopedic issues in the foot, and then the drop off in efficiency as he's aged. He might be closer to age 29, with this body than age 21, 22. But you can't argue with the talent. You can't argue with the type of prospect he was coming out of high school. And we consistently see that these 5-star guys or, high-end 4-star guys that go to the premier schools, even if they don't actually pop or have a fully successful or, maybe underperform versus expectations over the course of the college career, they still find their way to early draft capital, because the NFL guys know the names from the time these guys are 17 years old and in their senior seasons of high school anyway. So I just love that you're making sure that Justin Ross is on the radar of our team here. We were all fading him, mostly admittedly because Travis May, who's our lead Devy guy, he's just very down on Ross because of the medicals. And because of that, I think he spooked us all in the initial volume of the guide. But this is a name that I think that we can't forget. I don't think you'll have to go 110 here until after the actual NFL draft. If he gets the high-end draft capital, maybe early to mid round 2 would cause him to land in this space. But if you're drafting early, or if you're in dynasty startups that include the rookies in the startup, which is the most fun way to play dynasty, he could be a huge value, like in the double-digit rounds, mid-double-digit rounds of dynasty startups. So great pick, Scott. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about Ross the rest of the spring. I'm going to go to a gadget player. He doesn't have as good of a profile probably as Jahan Dotson. He doesn't have the elite high school name or school of George Pickens, but he's fun as hell. And this is a player that I'm going to be drafting a lot. Give me Wandel Robinson, Dave, and I'll kick it back over to you.
My mom really loves him.
Okay, that's great.
I know very little about him. I just know the model loves him.
Yeah, so the thing we have to watch out for is, in this, it's already so annoying. I don't know. You wrote so many articles this year, Scott, that you probably haven't had the energy or interest, frankly, in looking on the timeline or what a lot of people are writing. But the beats are just insufferably ranting about, who their team's Deebo Samuel will be in 2022. Like nobody else is going to be Deebo Samuel. Like he's built like a running back and moves like a receiver. Like he's so rare. And Wandel Robinson is maybe 30 pounds lighter version of Deebo Samuel. He would be much more similar to a Tyreek Hill type of weapon in an offense, but not quite as electric, I think, as Tyreek. But he could take some jet sweeps, but he's not going to line up in the backfield like Deebo and literally be the next wide back in the NFL. So, Dave, I see you've already keyed in Jahan Dotson there.
Yeah, I have. I think to me, this is just the pick here that makes sense, especially when you look at where some of these wide receivers are projected to go. Looks like Dotson could sneak his way into the first round. One of the places that you see him getting mocked to is Green Bay. So there's a little bit of a separation at this point between him and guys like Pickens. So when I start to look for my picks in this spot, I'm going to try to find those guys that I think have a chance of getting on the field early. So I will go with Dotson. I would like for him to be a little bit bigger for normal, like where I normally look for in wide receivers. But at this point, I think he's the pick for me.
Yeah, Dotson 76 percentile API, easily clears the 60th percentile that we're looking for, and really just a click or two below where we saw Drake London and David Bell fall. So again, speaking to the quality that's available here near the 1-2 turn. Scott, you're at the top of the second here.
Yeah, I'll take Trey McBride out of Colorado State. Probably maybe too early for a PPR league, non-tight end premium, but the model loves it. Two big key statistics are best season yards per route run, final season yards per game. Those are two of the ones doing the heavy lifting. And, his best season by yards per route run is better than Kyle Pitts' best season. His final season yards per game, only 3.5 yards per game off Kyle Pitts. So like a really special prospect per my model. And with tight ends, for whatever reason, typically strength of schedule, strength level of competition is massively important for wide receivers. The model hates non-power 5 wide receivers, but for tight ends, it says it's really not that important. So I don't know. I feel good about it.
Yeah, I think in tight end premium, this is exactly where McBride should be going. And I think he's going to probably be one of these players that goes at the end of the first round to a very good team. And he's gonna see a post NFL draft spike, and I think he could end up, by the time we're doing most rookie drafts in May, he could end up in this spot, even just in a traditional PPR league. And I mean, everyone is always hunting for kind of the next cheat code at tight end. There are so few of them, but if you do actually find one that can give you a 2 or 3 point, per game advantage each week, it really does so much for your win percentage and dynasty, especially because you can just bank on that every year. So love the pick with McBride. He was a favorite of our team. At RotoViz, we always prescribe to building teams around elite tight ends. It's just so important. Scott, I've played dynasty with you long enough to know that you agree with those sentimentalities, and obviously you're staying true to the brand there, taking them at the 201.
I just want to say again, this is going to look dramatically different for me in like 3 weeks. Also, the model, a lot of heavy lifting, especially with tight ends, is athleticism. I don't know if you have any thoughts there. I've heard people say he's probably not too athletic. No.
I mean, he might be slightly more athletic than Jason Witten, but he's not Vernon Davis. He's not Kyle Pitts. Okay. But right. We've seen. There's nothing that would scare me off of thinking he couldn't be, a mid tight end one quickly. I think it's a relatively low bar to clear. And if he lands on a team where he's not, when you're Kyle Pitts, you're drafted to be your team's primary weapon. When you're Trey McBride, you're part of the complement of assets on the offense. And, if Dave just mentioned Green Bay. If a player like McBride ended up in Green Bay and Devontae Adams is scaring the bejesus out of the defense on every play, I mean, McBride could eat. So I have no problems there. We saw Dalton Schultz, who's not exactly a world beater, provide plenty of fantasy value this year. And the list goes on. So But I do think that's accurate. He's going to be a pretty average athlete at the position. So at the 202, I'm going to go George Pickens here. Sean made a comment when we were doing our mock drafts that, if things had just fallen a little bit differently, perhaps Pickens would be up there at the top of the first round, and NFL teams may view him that way anyway. So it would not surprise me to see him go, as a top 5 receiver in the actual NFL draft, despite being wide receiver 10 in our mock draft here. So back to you, Dave.
Yeah, so I think here I actually will go with Kyren Williams. Now, there's a couple of things that you could be concerned about with Williams. At the same time, he looks like the player that could be the biggest surprise at the running back position of those players that you would have towards the top. Looks to be doing pretty well in terms of impressing scouts. Actually, when you go and you look at where he's likely to be selected among other running backs this year, in taking a look at NFL mock draft database.com, he's going as the 4th running back around pick 70. So, we talked about him a little bit last week. He's a Notre Dame product, has decent receiving numbers in his final 2 years in college, which could be something that differentiates him a little bit, gets him on the field. So I will be going with Williams.
Yeah, love that. And, now I think you're past what would be most people's wide receiver tier there anyway. You either have to make some sort of sacrifice in terms of program, quality or production. And those are neither one of those are things that, they're not consolations that we, they're not, I'm too tired. I can't think of the word. They're not concessions that we would like to make. This early in the second round. So don't mind you going with the running back there. Scott, you are on the clock at 204.
Yeah, I don't know if this is way too early, but I like this guy, so I'm going to take him. Damien Pierce. I just love the way he runs. Everyone has a type. His running style is exactly my type. And I'm worried he might have a little Alvin Kamara in him, just the situation, because Lance Zierlein loves him and said the fact that he didn't have twice as many touches as he did is a fireable offense for the coaching staff. And that's sort of exactly what we saw with Tennessee and Alvin Kamara, just gross misusage in a committee with 2 massive inferiors. And so if I take my model and I basically just double his touches in his final season, it says he's an elite prospect, but otherwise he's pretty far down the pack. So just going to take him just because I watched his highlights and thought he was fun.
I've got a little bit of a crush on him too, Scott. I took him in the 3rd round of every single one of our mocks. So I think he seems to be a big guy in the film community. Obviously, he doesn't check a lot of the production boxes, but man, Florida's just been a disastrous situation for really for everyone going through the program the last couple of years. So, and again, with the relative lack of quality beyond the clear top guys at running back, I think you will see guys like Williams and Pierce go here. If you don't pull the trigger early, there's no guarantee they get back to you in the 3rd round. So if you like that back, I think you take him here, and we're basically in swingers territory. I am also going to go, because I'm worried that Dave will take him if I don't take him here. I'm going to take a running back and keep the run going. I'm going to take Tyler Algiere out of BYU. I love this guy, man. You talk about loving to watch a guy play. So Scott, he came to BYU as a linebacker after being a standout running back, and actually played linebacker as a freshman. Had a bit of a transition year as a sophomore, and then just obliterated the competition after switching back. And he's one of the bigger backs in the class. Just awesome when it comes to the big runs. And he's one of the elite hustle guys. If you're just gonna highlight scout players, he has maybe one of the most impressive highlights. It's a situation where BYU loses a fumble, and then Algiere chases down the corner who has picked up the ball and then strips it back, takes the ball back for BYU. And so it's just one of those players that I think I just really think scouting departments are going to love. I'm really excited about him. He reminds me a little bit of James Conner from a style perspective, and I think that he could provide immense value as a dart in the second round here. So, Dave, we'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead here and take the first quarterback who I think undoubtedly should be Sam Howell. I know other people at other sites are not as high on Howell, but when I look at this class, he is clearly the number one. In a very simple analysis that I do in the guide, I haven't put this into the formal model yet for quarterbacks, but there's three things that I look at. He crushes in all of these three things, comes in at a 96th percentile or better in all of them. And even when I compare him to last year's class in these three metrics, he scores better than any of those quarterbacks last year, which is a very, very strong class. For example, 305 total yards per game, 2.9 total touchdowns per game, and a max adjusted yards per attempt of 11.1. Those numbers are off the charts. And he can run too, right? He's got the rushing ability. There's a lot of rushing ability in the class this year for the quarterbacks, but I think Howell should be able to prosper both as a passer and as a rusher at the next level. So I'm fairly excited about him enough to go ahead and take him here. I like him a lot more than the other backs or the other passers this year.
I think he's safer. That was a conversation we were having during our, volume 1 summit meeting. Sam Howell. We think that this guy is not one that you're going to whiff on. There are, maybe some people would prefer the rushing up, the overall rushing upside of Malik Willis and the electricity there, but Howell, plenty of rushing ability on his own, and I think you properly highlighted a lot of the reasons to be in on Howell. It's really difficult for me to imagine him not going in the top 15, even if there's not a lot of NFL clubs, I guess, salivating over the class. So, Scott, you going to keep the QB run going here? Or is there a position player that you like?
Yeah, could I actually trade for Tyler Algiere? Because I checked him out. He looks awesome.
Yes.
Especially, Javonte Williams, kind of similar thing. Played defense in high school, recruited as a defender. And then 1,600 yards last year and 1,100 the year before that. What's really interesting is Brigham Young, I don't think, had a running back with over 500 yards for like 4 or 5 years before that.
Jamal Williams was the last guy. Jamal Williams was the last one.
Damn.
Yeah.
So that's a big positive indicator. Yeah, I'll take Malik Willis. So we talked before about the importance of an elite top 5 quarterback, specifically the highest end of the spectrum. And I really don't – people say, oh, you don't need to take a quarterback top 3, top 5 in a draft because guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen were found in the middle of the draft. But I don't think that's going to happen anymore because I think NFL teams learn their lesson, the underrated upside and nitpicked sort of warts and things like that. And everything I'm hearing is Malik Willis has sort of ridiculous upside, ridiculous traits, but he's very raw and there's all these problems. But I mean, we saw it last year too with Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. I think there's a really good chance. I know no one else is saying it, but I think there's a really good chance he might surprise us and go top 5. And then from a fantasy perspective, obviously, Konami code all day. So that's easy.
The trendy mock that I've been seeing is Carolina at 3, which would, that would be something. Can't argue with either of those picks. I think this is an area where it makes sense to fortify the quarterback depth. And, from a dynasty perspective, if you want to trade, your established backup to a team that's willing to give you anything and kind of replace it with a rookie looking for that elite upside, that's something that makes some sense. A lot of times the guys like Kirk Cousins, who Scott was picking on earlier, that show up well in year-end fantasy rankings make for the perfect add-in pieces in 1 QB dynasty league trades. to push somebody over the top, but they really are not necessarily actually helping you very much. And knowing that you can grab a Howell or a Willis or a Matt Corral, et cetera, provides you some protection. Because there are some other quarterbacks that I think will be available to me at the 23 spot, I'm just going to get the guy that I want to draft. Scott had Justin Ross, just the guy that he wanted to draft. The guy that I want to draft is Skye Moore, man. Love Skye Moore. Second highest API in the class, 88th percentile. It's pretty cool. Travis May left a great little nugget in volume 1 of our draft guide. This is actually probably going to be the third receiver in recent memory from Western Michigan going in the top 100 of the NFL draft. Dave or Scott, can you name either of the other two?
I almost Googled it. No, I'm going to refrain so I don't embarrass myself.
Yeah. Do you remember, Dave?
Sorry, I actually was hard at research on my next pick, so I didn't even hear the question.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll just get to it. So Corey Davis came out of this program.
Western Michigan.
Yeah, and was a top 10 NFL. I think he was top 10. Memory serves. And then Dwayne or D. Eskridge.
Right.
That the Seahawks just took. So, but Skye Moore's a different animal. He's going to be a slot guy, huge yak guy. I just love these types of players. I love drafting wide receivers at the end of the second round who are either from the big school, but, didn't quite pop out, or, you get the small school guy and take a swing. Cooper Kupp was available in this range, several years ago. Terry McLaurin, if you want to go the big school route, who didn't really pop in college. So this is, there's a guy kind of reminds me of a McLaurin from a profile perspective, from a big program that's still available here. We'll have to see if he goes in the next 4 picks. Dave, you are up with pick 209 here.
Sure. So I'm going to veer off of some of the picks that I did make when we were going back and making the selections for the guide, because I want to talk about a player that we have not mentioned yet, and that's Kennedy Brooks, who actually put up the highest breakaway rush score of all players this year and has a pretty compelling profile when you look at his body of work through college. In his first year at Oklahoma, 12 rushing touchdowns, 1,056 yards, goes for nearly 8.9 yards per carry. Not that I care that much about that, but even in college, that's a very high total. An RB dominator as a freshman of 0.4, stayed at 0.4 or higher for the rest of his career. Then in 2021, in 13 games, 1,252 yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, had 10 receptions each season. So, not a player that you're going to expect to profile as a prolific pass catcher, but all around a nice body of work. He's a player that I have not heard generating much buzz. No. It doesn't look, though, like the scouts like him enough for him to go very high in the draft. So I actually wanted to bring him up just to see if you had any thoughts, Curtis, as to why that might be, or if there's something that's holding people back on him in comparison to what you see when you just look at the numbers.
Yeah, I don't really get it either, man. He's kind of rumored to be in that undrafted territory, like late day 3 or undrafted. So, he checks the productivity boxes. I have plenty of exposure in Devi. I've been a big Kennedy Brooks fan since his freshman year. Stat line and that prolific Oklahoma offense. So, I think it's great that you took him for the exercise. I definitely don't think you have to take him in this range. Yep. You were taking Jerome Ford in this range, right? In our
Brian Robinson
our draft guide draft. So it is cool to get another one mixed in there. There's another running back I can think of maybe that would need to be called in this range. So Scott, this could be your final pick of the exercise, man. It's the 210. Who's going to be your Mr. Irrelevant tonight?
I'll take Christian Watson. I'm friends with a film evaluator who watched him at the Senior Bowl and said, draft him everywhere. He's a top 5 wide receiver in this class. Easy. I'll just trust my buddy.
Yeah, he's really gaining a lot of steam. He was not on our radar before the Senior Bowl. We actually did not even list him in our top 60 in the guide. We pressed to put it out early each year to get the conversation started. And, I think we're always pretty important in terms of helping to form the early ADP. Watson's going to be a big mover in volume 2 after all the positive press that he's gotten. And there are few receivers that offer the combination of size and speed that Watson brings to the table. So I don't know who your buddy is, but if his opinion matters enough to you, I think this is the range that I would consider taking him in as well in the late second. So great pick, Scott, there, and I'm glad that it gave us an opportunity to hit the name. Dave and I will definitely be circling back on Watson and some other Senior Bowl standouts in the next week or two. This is going to
mention Curtis.
Oh, go ahead.
There's a lot of articles out there already asking if he is the next Deebo Samuel.
Yes. Yes, he is actually Deebo Samuel's son. Little known fact. So, okay, here at the 211, there's a couple of different ways that I could go. I think Rachaad White is interesting. Travis would be screaming at us for not taking him yet. Rachaad White is just a hair younger than me. I'm going to pass. I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go with Jerome Ford either. I'm gonna go with the high profile player who's probably gonna get the draft capital and probably gonna bust. But it's just hard for me to ignore it this late in the draft. I'll take John Mechie here. And Dave, you can make the final pick tonight.
All right, I like it because that makes it easy on me. I had seen Mechie sitting out there, and I was thinking, I should probably go ahead and make that pick now. But I will go.
Man, I already regret it. He's like a 30th percentile API guy.
Man,
always the third or fourth guy at Alabama, even as they kind of churned all the receivers. But high profile program, and he's gonna be day 2 pick. So what do you want to do? I mean, that's good value here.
Right. So I am going to go with Jerome Ford, a player that is going to be hard to pick up what could have been his potential when you start running him through models. Started off his career at Alabama, moved to Cincinnati, first year at Cincinnati, goes for 8 rushing touchdowns, 6.6 per carry in a 10-game season, but then really smashes in 2021, goes for 1,315 yards and 19 touchdowns, a running back dominator there of 0.71, had the talent to go to Alabama, had to play with a lot of other great backs when he gets his opportunity in Cincinnati, performs really well. As I've mentioned before, I don't really know what I'm doing when I look at film, but when I look at film of Jerome Ford, I get excited, back it up with those numbers at Cincinnati, and that's enough for me to be interested in drafting him.
All right. Well, man, that was a fun exercise. It was great to hear and see a couple other names come off the board that we haven't seen in the first or second round. We'll have to see how this compares to our draft next week with Danny Kelly. Scott, Danny's coming on the show. It'll be really fun to see, who he's on in particular in the second round. And for those of you who maybe would like a little bit more analysis on these picks, who I think maybe went a little early, who I think maybe was a value in this exercise, I will try to put something on the site, later this week in written form. Scott, anything you want to add before we sign off here?
No, you're going to write this up?
Yeah, I'll write it up, man. All
right. Don't be afraid to trash me. Like I said, I'm still way behind on research. But what was my worst pick? You'd say?
I think Damien Pierce was just too. I don't think you need to take him there.
All right.
But
appreciate it.
But if he gets day 3 capital, it would be totally justified because again, there's just not access to the running backs in this class. So you might just be peering into the crystal ball and be earlier than the rest of us. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Scott Barrett, DFB on Twitter, fantasypoints.com. That's all I got.
Dave, anything else, man?
No, that's it. Just appreciate Scott running through this with us. Fun exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you need me, I will be icing my wrists because of Allen wrench fatigue. We will be back later this week with more RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. This has been Curtis, Dave, and Scott. See you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. Send us questions at rvffshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at DaveCabanFF and at CPatrickNFL. Leave us a voicemail at 978-615-9214 and make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
For anybody still watching, I forgot to give the bourbon shout out tonight. I was too excited to talk to Scott. I went with the Eagle Rare because Scott is a rare bird. Thanks again for coming on, buddy.